This is Pinnacle Lutheran Church Sunday Bible Study. The following session was recorded on Sunday, May 12th, 2013, continuing the book of Revelation.
We're going to go back to the Old Testament, to the book of Daniel, most specifically Daniel chapter 7. And what we're going to do is we're going to read Daniel 7, and we're going to then read Revelation chapter 13. And I won't explain necessarily why we're doing this right now, but hopefully you'll be able to see why it is we're doing this after we see the two of them parallel together, okay? So we'll read Daniel chapter 7. We're going to actually read through verse 14. I think that should be good enough, and then we're going to flip to Revelation 13. So whoever has Daniel 7, if you could read verses 1 through 14.
In the first year
Belshazzar, I believe.
King of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was laying on the bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were four winds of heaven churning up the great sea. Four great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had wings of an eagle, and I watched it until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground, so that it stood on 2 feet like a man, and the heart of a man was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, 'Get up and eat your fill of flesh.' After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the other former beasts, and it had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like of a man, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I looked, thrones were set in place. The Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was sealed, and the books were open. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words that the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed."
Okay. A lot of talk about beasts in Daniel chapter 7. We're going to actually now see, as we move into Revelation chapter 13, some very similar language that goes with that. So, Revelation chapter 13, if you have that, if you would, you can just go ahead and read the full chapter, if you wouldn't mind. Revelation chapter 13.
And I saw a beast rising out of the sea, with 10 horns and 7 heads.
with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed as of a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling. That is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation. And all who dwell on earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of the life of the Lamb who was slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword must he be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints.
Okay, and then somebody else would read about the second beast.
Then I saw another beast coming out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb, but he spoke like a dragon. He exercised all the authority of the first beast on his behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. And he performed great and miraculous signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of men. Because of the signs he was given power to do on behalf of the first beast, he deceived the inhabitants of the earth. He ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. He was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that it would speak and cause all who refuse to worship the image of the first beast to be killed. And he forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. And this calls for wisdom. If anyone has insight, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is man's number. His number is 666.
Okay. A lot going on there, and actually, I'm going to put Daniel 7 on the back burner just for now. We're going to actually get to it very, very quickly. But I want to talk first off about who this beast is. Who the beast is. And now, to get a better understanding of this, we have to go back to the latter part of chapter 12 and understand that who we've been talking about. In chapter 12, what was the majority of that chapter designated to? Who was it designated to?
Satan.
Okay, most specifically, the dragon. Okay, so we see in Revelation chapter 12 that it's ending with the dragon, and now you see there in the last line, then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring and on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea. Okay, so who stood on the sand of the sea? Satan, the dragon. Okay, the dragon stood on the side of the sea. And that's important because as we get into these things, we're starting to understand that these beasts that are coming up are not Satan. They're not Satan that are coming out of the sea. Now, here's an important thing that I want to address as well. What's the significance of the sea? I'll give you some biblical hints. Psalm 74, verse 13, and or Matthew 8:26. What is the significance of the sea? And not only that, but then even, like we've talked about before, you can also go back to Revelation chapter 4, verse 6, and also see some references to that as well. So, Psalm 74:13, Matthew 8:26, and Revelation 4:6. The significance of the sea.
Parting of the Red Sea.
Okay? What's that?
That's where the monster lives.
It's where the monster lives, okay, where the abyss comes. Which verse did you find, Dave?
Psalm 74.
Psalm 74. And in Psalm 74, from what I can remember, most specifically that verse, what was it, 13?
It just says, but it was you, referring to God, it was you, O God, who split open the sea by your power and broke the heads of the monster in the water.
Okay, so basically it's the abyss or the sea. And then we see this back when we go back to Revelation 9, because where was it that Satan came from? The abyss, the sea. Not necessarily specifically the sea, but the abyss, which is also a synonymous name given to the sea. Okay, who has Matthew 8? Matthew 8:26.
And he said to them, why are you afraid, O you of little faith? Then he rose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. And men marveled, saying, what sort of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him?
Now that's the story of what?
When they were out fishing.
Okay, and the disciples were asleep, and Jesus was asleep in the back of the boat, and the disciples were very worried that they were going to be killed within the storm. And Jesus rises up to them and he says, "What are you afraid of? The Son of God is here in the boat with you." And then the way that Jesus addresses it, and we've talked about this story many, many times, is he addresses it and says, clearly you have very, very little faith of these things. And then Jesus stands up and then rebukes, calms, stills the sea. We look at it maybe just in terms of how fishermen would look at it, but even not necessarily so. Have you ever talked to a fisherman? Like a real, I don't want to say, a real crusty, there we go, a real crusty fisherman. And how they talk about the sea? It's an entity in and of itself. That when the waves are coming, it's not just as if, it's a 14-foot swell. They're talking about it as having a personality, and it actually, does things like steals men's souls and stuff like that. And the scriptures go even further, and to talk about the sea is to say, the sea is synonymous with the tumult and the tossing to and fro that we experience within this life. But not only that, we look at it. Here's another. I'm trying to think of where it was, where Jesus healed. Legion. It was Legion. Okay. Legion was possessing a man. Jesus comes and casts the demons out into what? Pigs. Who run into not just the water, the sea. So Jesus casts out demons, sends them back to where it is that they belong, namely the sea. So we see, no pun intended, sorry, that was bad. That was terrible. So that we see here that the dragon is on the edge of the sea. But I want to go back here and look at Revelation chapter 4. Revelation chapter 4. Remember, and I think Janice, I had talked to you about this one in terms of the sea and what the status of the sea is in Revelation chapter 4. Revelation 4, verse 6.
Also before the throne there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. In the center, around the throne, were 4 living creatures, and they were covered with eyes in front and in back.
Okay, look at the status of the sea. It's calm. It's like crystal. It's glass. But here's the thing, and this is what I remember saying to Jan, and I think most of you had heard it as well. Right now, in Revelation chapter 4, what is it that separates man from God? The sea is still there in Revelation 4. We're going to see a significant change in the latter part of Revelation because guess what's not going to exist anymore? The sea.
Does that mean literally our oceans will be gone?
No, it doesn't literally mean that at all. It's just, the sea is a figurative language, is to say, right now in Revelation 4, and throughout, really the 3.5 years or the 42 months that we've been talking so incessantly about, that there are things which separate us from God. Namely, who is it? Satan, the accuser. The sea. The tumultuous and deep abyss. Okay, so we see here in Revelation chapter 13, or rather the latter part of Revelation chapter 12, that the dragon, Satan, is sitting on the edge of the sea, and then the first beast starts to come up. Okay? Satan arose from the abyss. Not only that, but we remember that Satan arose from the abyss back in chapter 9, verse 11, and also, again, we're reminded that he came up from there as well in chapter 11, verse 7. Okay? So let's look at some of the characteristics of the first beast. Okay, he had 10 horns and 7 heads, and this is where we're going to actually start to piggyback it with what we read in Daniel. 10 diadems on his horns and blasphemous names on his heads, and the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Now that was something that we had heard back in Daniel's prophecy. So what's happening here is John is hearkening back to, and all of these things are being tied together, is to say, the vision that Daniel was having all the way back in Daniel chapter 7 is fulfilled and is now completed in the actual manifestation of these beasts being and coming from the abyss. And it all fits into the understanding, okay, remember in chapter 12, God through John is saying, these things are going to happen. The dragon's going to come. He's going to rule the earth. There's nothing that you can do to fight against him. But the battle's already won. He's already been defeated by Jesus. And then we get into Revelation chapter 13 where you start to talk about these two beasts. But there's an interlude in the middle of chapter 13 which harkens us back to remind us of where our names are written. We've seen this before in Revelation. You remember where we've also seen a couple different times where our names are written?
In the book of life.
Our names are written in the book of life. Exactly. So we get back to revisit that in Revelation chapter 13. But what's happening here, and we'll go back and I'm just going to check my notes on this one. We see that the beast is coming from a tumultuous sea. And we have to understand, okay, that the horns that are on Daniel's beasts and the horns that are on the beasts in Revelation they symbolize something. They symbolize power. And both of the beasts in Daniel chapter 7 and in Revelation chapter 13 are coming with power. And I just want to skip ahead here just a little bit. Because we're going back, to try to dovetail these things a little bit. Maybe I'm going a little bit too quickly on this. Does anybody have any questions so far as to where we're at and where we might be going? Because I'm trying to figure out for myself which would be best if we actually go back to Daniel chapter 7 or if we stayed in Revelation 13. Anything that's sticking out?
Well, there's all sorts of comparisons. The lion is brought up in both of these things. The leopard
Yeah.
is brought up in both of these as the first beast, but there's differences in the way that they're described. So I guess one big question would be why did the leopard that Daniel see change characteristics or do something that already fulfilled his that made him change characteristics, and now the leopard's going to look differently because of something?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. One of the things that in terms of the order or the chronology of the way that the way Daniel's dreams appeared, it's switched, it's reversed, and the way that John's seeing these things manifested in Revelation is the exact flipped opposite of the way that Daniel had seen them. So I can't remember the last beast that Daniel had seen.
It's the one that isn't any real beast. It has iron teeth and it's frightening, but it doesn't parallel to any, I mean, it's not like there's any animal that's like it.
Right. Okay. So let's, you know what, and let's just go back to that right now, because that actually, you remember going back to what we had talked about. I had it and it was gone. This has been not a good start to the day. Back to 7, Daniel chapter 7, most specifically with the fourth beast, which, as David said, is not a real beast. Okay? Now, what's happening here is, it's synonymous here, the fourth beast is synonymous with coming with the era, or during the era where comes like one like the Son of Man. Okay? And bear with me for a second here on this. I'm sorry, you guys. So basically what we're seeing here is that when we're looking at in John 13:1, or not John 13:1, Revelation 13:1. The beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns, 7 heads, and 10 diadems on its horns, and blasphemous names on its heads. This last beast is synonymous with this first beast is synonymous with the last beast that Daniel is talking about. Okay, and there are actual types that we can, types of people, types of instances, types of organizations, types of societies that we can fit into this particular. They fit the mold of Daniel's last and John's first, the first beast that's coming here. So what's happening is that this first beast is one that's going to come during the reign of the Son of Man, and he's also going to be. And I had it there and it was gone again.
The woman can then flip-flop because of Jesus is coming.
That has something to do with it too. So what's happening is we're looking at it and saying, although we can't we can affix a specific entity to it. Most specifically, right now, the fourth beast of Daniel can be used as a type of any organization. And this, it's really quite amazing because it's every sort of social or cultural organization with the exception of any sort of religious organization. So, for example, it's specifically talking about the Roman Empire. Within the context of Revelation chapter 13. Specifically, locatedly, it's going to be talking about the Roman Empire because the fourth beast is going to come during the reign and or when the Son of Man is on earth. Who's the Son of Man? Jesus. Okay, what was going on and who was in control of the civil, the political, the power, the structure, the economics, etc., so on during the time that Jesus was here? The Roman Empire. One thing that's very interesting is that the Roman Empire, what they did is during their time, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, but what the Roman Empire did is they did a very good job of secularizing the society. Not only that, but they did a very good job of implementing the worship of many other gods. And not only that, but they started to really perfect ways in which they could secularize their societies. And ironically, what's been the case since the Roman Empire is every civilized country that has really tried to ostracize or get themselves away from Christianity in some way have followed the Romans' model. And so you start to see now, okay, but you have to remember that, okay, the fourth beast of Daniel, the first beast of John, or the first beast of Revelation, is talking not just specifically and locatedly about the Roman Empire, but they're talking about any entity which would fill this type. Okay, remember when we had this discussion at the beginning of Revelation? Where you look at it and say, okay, well, we're looking at types. Types of beasts, I guess, is the best way to talk about it. So therefore, any institution, any entity that would look to dissuade or take us away from God, the one true God, would be a type of the Roman Empire, but most specifically a type of the first beast. Okay, does that all make sense? I know it's a lot of backtracking and forward-looking, etc., so on.
The notes, I think, help to make it a little bit clearer too. He says, the four beasts in Daniel's vision represented four world powers. This first beast is best taken as an embodiment of broad political authority. So this, as you're saying, it's, it's just something other than...
Right. So the first, and here's the important thing, just to get a macro view of it real quickly. The first beast is political, sociological, socioeconomic, etc., so on. The second beast, guess what happens? Now the church gets involved. And it gets real hairy, because the second beast of Revelation 3, or of Revelation 13, the second beast is religious, and guess who has power over the second beast? The first beast. In other words, politics starts to sway religion. And then politics starts to use religion to promote its own cause. Okay, now and the way that this works out is to say, and we'll get to it more when we look at with regard to the first and the second beast, or when we look at the second beast. But what's happening here is first and foremost, let's look at the first beast again. First beast again. Okay. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. Now, the way that I'd seen that this was able to be interpreted, upon first reading, my first thought was, before I knew that the beast was not Satan, my impression was that the beast was Satan, and this was an indication of a fulfillment of Genesis. You will crush his head, he will bruise your heel. Okay, but we've gotten past that. So what's going on here is that there are mortal wounds that we can see that are scars upon the heads of this first beast. In other words, they're beasts that have killed. Now, here's a good example. Does this empire exist anymore? It doesn't. I mean, it does and it doesn't. I mean, remnants of it do. So in other words, there's been a mortal blow that's been struck against the Roman Empire. However, there have been other empires that have followed it that resemble it in form and structure, that are basically a resurrection of that type. Once again, that type of an entity that would be looking only to lead people away from God. Now, there's a lot that we're biting off here. And if it's more than we can chew, then we'll have to kind of take some out of our mouth and digest it a little bit. But this is the basic summary of the first beast. It's largely political. It's been...
So let me paraphrase that
Sure.
in my own words to make
Yep.
sure I got it in my...
Yep.
So is a secular organization that exerts something on the order of supreme authority.
Yep.
And the end result is to lead its subjects away from the one true God.
Okay, right.
Is that right?
Yeah. Ultimately, and here's the thing. Who is this Roman Empire? Once again, it was the Roman Empire. It can be anybody who fits this particular type. It could be any organization that still does this. Okay? Who is the first beast and then the second beast? Whose control are they under? Remember who is standing on the sea?
The dragon.
The dragon. Okay? The dragon is the master of the first beast, who is then the master of the second beast. Both of them are under the control and the power of the dragon. Jeff.
So what we kind of have here is maybe Satan mocking the Trinity.
He is.
He's got the three, and the first may be the Antichrist.
Yep. And you'll see that once you get to the latter part of Revelation 13, where you start to see the number. Because the 666 that we see there is the number of man. It's not a perfect Trinity, nor could it ever be, because the number for the Trinity is what? 7, 7, 7. Perfection, perfection, perfection. 666, mark of the beast, mark of the hand that will be placed upon those who are under the power, not just of the second beast, but of the first beast, but ultimately under the power of the dragon. All of us are going to be affected by this. However, this is where the time where we have to take that time, where in the interlude, where we look and say, okay, yes, the beasts have been given mouths uttering haughty and blasphemous words and allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. We've heard that number before. This isn't new information that we're being told. So, and then he says, not only that, it is allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. Ugh. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation. In other words, we can't beat it. We can't. Okay? And all who dwell on earth will worship it. Boy, welcome to church. You didn't know that you were going to be told that you were going to worship Satan today, did you? And that's not necessarily what it's saying. But what it's saying is that the power that the dragon and these beasts are exerting is beyond our control. Think about the song or the hymn, A Mighty Fortress. Perfect. Fits perfectly into this.
Yeah, but also speaks to those who will not go with him and be slain.
Right. Right. But we go, look at verse 10. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and the faith of the saints. John puts it very succinctly. Very, very clearly that these things are going to come, and here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. But then we've also been reminded that these things are not going to kill us for good. They're not going to kill us forever. And I think that's really what's so hard a lot of times is we look at these things and forget that in the book of Revelation, God through John is talking about an eternity. Infinite. That's a familiar cry. We so often can only think within small little periods of time. And so then, by virtue of that, when the Scriptures come and tell us and say, okay, from the time that we are born until the time that we die, which happens sometime in this continuum of timelessness, really, but from the time you're born to the time you die, especially if you're a Christian, you're going to be plagued with suffering, etc., so on. Now, of course, we've talked about that before. What does suffering mean? Does that mean it's always looking like sackcloth and ashes? No, it's not what it means at all. It's just to say sometimes, especially when you look at the third article of the Creed and the explanation in the Small Catechism, suffering is when what is talked about there is to say our best life on earth will be considered to be suffering compared to what it is we will see when we go to heaven. So we have to understand it in terms of the scale in which God talks about suffering. You know, my wedding day, along with the day that Knox was born, along with, this Mother's Day and every other Mother's Day and Melissa's birthday, those are always the best days of my life. But heaven will be much better. Right? So, we look at, we agreed this morning, I told Knox, I said, it's Mother's Day, this is Mommy's Day, we'll do whatever she wants to do today. Maybe next year it'll all come to fruition, right? We can hope. But the point is, you look at it and you say, okay, you look at suffering. When you say suffering and you hear your pastor say it's all about suffering, well, it is and it isn't. Because it's not sackcloth and ashes. We don't walk around moping around. There are days where you should. I mean, good grief. There are days where, when the Mariners, well, I shouldn't say days, there's been 10 years where the Mariners have been bad. And those are right to mope around about those particular things, I guess. But the point is you look at it and say, there's going to be these things. There's going to be different levels, I guess, of suffering. Maybe that's not even the right way to put it. Because once we see God face to face, we can't even imagine the level of peace and joy and satisfaction that we are going to have. It's just going to be unfathomable. I've talked to Mark Capuano quite a bit about this, the head elder. And I said, okay, tell me what your best definition of heaven is. And he's come around finally, and he gave me this answer. He said, it's the place where there's the absence of all desire. Why? Because all of our desires are filled. Because the fact of the matter is that from the beginning of creation, all we have ever desired is who? Most specifically, Christ. To be in communion with Him and for Him to be in communion with us, that's the way that it was from the beginning. The original sin threw that all out the window, and we've been searching for that fulfillment ever since. I heard one guy explain it to me this way. We're looking in our lives to fill a God-shaped hole with all sorts of other stuff. But the only thing that fits is Jesus. Now, I mean, don't imagine that as like a puzzle piece of you that, like is Jesus shaped. That's kind of funny, though. But to understand, you look at it and you say, well, how does He continue to put Himself into me? Well, His Word, where does that come in? In through my ears. The faith which is worked then through that Word is worked within me. I look at it and I say a lot of times, there are days where I think I couldn't possibly believe in Him more than I already do. And then all of a sudden, I'm corrected, I guess is a good way to put it. And there's other days where I look at it and I say, I couldn't believe in Him less. I'm like the disciples in the boat. But His love for me never ceases. His love for you never ceases. And that's what He's reminding us, is that even in the midst of these things, even in the midst of all sorts of powers and principalities, and I think Revelation 13 is so appropriate for where we are right now. Times are tough. It's just one of the things where you look at it and say, Colorado just passed a law. Did you all read about the new law Colorado passed? Colorado passed a law. Are y'all familiar with what's going on with Kermit Gosnell in Philadelphia? Colorado passed a law that would make it legal to do what Kermit Gosnell did. In other words, there are no laws in Colorado legislating whether or not, or any time which is inappropriate for an abortion doctor to kill a baby. It's law.
And what's so funny is you talk about the Roman Empire, that sort of thing was legal, and it was the father's decision whether he would keep children or not.
Yep.
It's remarkable how the circle comes.
Well, right, and you look at it and you say the template is the same, and so when you see these things and the horns that are coming and the sense of power that they come with and the undeniable, if you question the emperor in the Roman Empire, you didn't live for very long. If you were a Christian within the Roman Empire, you had a tendency not to live very long either. And sure, they didn't. And sure, they didn't kill babies with sanitary means. But we start to think, and we talked about this at the Thursday Bible study. Just because we've cleaned death up, we've sanitized it, doesn't make it any less death. It's very, very difficult. We look at it and say that we're a lot different than it was in the Roman Empire. Yes, and I guess in certain ways. But the end result, a lot of times, is that people are dying.
I was going to say, I know you're saying it's more of a broader lifetime, but there's going to be very specific points in time that this is referencing that we may not have seen yet, especially when you're talking about the mark of the beast of the world economic system. So that seems like that's more of a future event. that hasn't been fulfilled yet.
Yeah, these things, I mean, once again, remembering that, for example, it's this and it's this. In other words, it's happened at a time and it's continuing to happen. It will continue to happen until the eschaton. And when we get into the second beast, yes, there was a time that it happened. There were times where it doesn't happen quite as much. There are times where it stepped up again, and that's where you start to see the scars and the marks that are on the beast's heads that have been healed. You start to look at it and say, these are fatal blows that have been struck where the victory has been won against these particular things, but then they rear their heads again, and they come back in the same way that they've come before. Just, and knowing history, I guess, helps us to understand that a little. And going back to what David, what you were saying is that, the ways that we're really approaching things today is not a whole lot, is not dissimilar from what was going on in the Roman Empire. We're not the first time they've tried to replicate this, and we won't be the last society where that will happen. But then once you get into the world economic thing, it's not necessarily where you start to look at it in terms of, matters of trade. It is specifically speaking about that. But what is it that causes people not to be able to trade equitably with each other? What's that? Okay, but looking at it with regard to the Scriptures.
So the mark of the beast.
Okay, the mark of the beast, which is only given to certain individuals. And this is basically a type and or an explanation just simply of persecution. Think about it in our modern day. You can be fired from your job for being a Christian.
You can.
I'm just saying that there are instances. Yes, well, you look at it and you say, there was an article that I had read recently of, it's an amazing thing. There was a chaplain in the Navy who was court-martialed because he was talking about Jesus on the front lines with his troops. Juxtapose that to a Muslim imam who was serving as a military chaplain, who did a military funeral for 2 American soldiers and renounced them as spawns of Satan in their own funerals. That was allowed. Second beast, where you would start to use, doesn't matter what kind of religion it happens to be, but you would use religion, period, religion, spirituality, something that would fit, that would work to promote your, whatever your agenda happens to be, within the political realm. So, but then the mark of the beast, where you start to look at it and say, okay, basically what the second beast is doing is he's working in concert, is under the direction of the first beast, ultimately the dragon. And he works in concert basically with the result that people are unable to make a living, unable to live comfortably, starve, can't trade equitably with each other.
You have to bring this into the not so distant past. If you could label that type Third Reich,
That was another
it
one.
makes us, all of us who are living now, I think, understand it a little bit better.
Right. You're absolutely right, Dan. Roman Empire, Adolf Hitler, Nazi Germany used the exact same thing. They started off with the first political power. You look at it, and this is what I love about the new atheists. I just said that. Can you believe that? This is what I love about the new atheists. They have rightly put their finger on the fact that these things happen. And they've said that they do it a little bit more forcefully. What they've said is all Christians use their religion to promote political prowess.
To promote political what?
Well, promote their political prowess or their political ideology, etc., so on. In other words, Christianity is nothing more than politics.
It'd be interesting to see if in any of his writings, Dietrich Bonhoeffer picked up on Revelation and what we're talking about today as he was living through the Third Reich.
Yeah. Yeah. There are indeed. Maybe give a little more flesh to that. And let us. Who is Dietrich Bonhoeffer?
Well, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Lutheran pastor, seminary teacher, who left Germany for a short time, came to New York, and taught at Union Theological Seminary in the early 40s, I think. But he felt compelled to go back to Germany to fight against the Third Reich, and was involved there in one of numerous plots to assassinate Adolf Hitler. And he paid the ultimate price for that in terms of being imprisoned and finally executed near the end of the war. But a very articulate Lutheran pastor.
Yeah, and so and then bringing that all to the fore in terms of whether Bonhoeffer in his writings articulated this particular what we're seeing in
Curious to find out.
Revelation 13 or not.
Yeah.
Revelation, and it goes back, Jeff, to what you had said. Whether it was the Roman Empire, whether it was the Third Reich, or whatever, it will happen again. And the unfortunate thing is that we look at it and say, as Revelation says, there is nothing that can be done to stop it. I don't, especially as an American, I don't like that.
That doesn't mean we shouldn't try to stand up.
No, well, sure, certainly, absolutely, but understanding what it'll mean when you do.
Well, that's what's so striking about verse 10b. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of the saints.
Yeah. Right. Endurance. And I think about it. Right. I think about it, endurance is like, can I make it up the stairs to the choir loft? Not the endurance that, really could mean my entire life. That's the type of endurance. And faithfulness, which you look at it and say, faithfulness which is given to us by virtue of the word that is spoken to us in the sacraments that are rightly given. Sue.
When it says in verse 18,
Yeah.
it says to calculate the number of the beast.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so that refers to belonging to Satan. But
Right.
what does it mean when it says the number of the beast? Does it mean beast number 1, beast number 2? Does it mean the devil in general?
I want to just see if I've got anything on that one real quick.
It says this would be a fitting number for the anti-Trinity.
I just want to read, I'll read you the notes here. The number is perplexing to us. But apparently it wasn't to John, as we see in 3:18. Okay? How does one figure it out? Through wisdom and intelligence, John says. That doesn't help us. Possibly those with the gift of gematria, which is basically the practice of assigning a number to a name. That's just a way that they were able to do it. Okay? Or possibly it takes a special spiritual gift to figure it out. The wisdom that John speaks of is the knowledge of Jesus Christ, which is given by the Holy Spirit. Okay, so we start to see that even the wisdom that John's talking about is not our own wisdom. It's an imputed wisdom that's given to us, and that's discerned by virtue of what the Holy Spirit does. Okay? The number of the beast is a human number. It is expressed in human language, and it represents human life. Man was created on the 6th day. 6 represents humanity, just as 7 represents God. 666 may represent a particular person. Okay? And these are just possibilities that they've talked about. So then we go on and we say, okay, for example, maybe it was Nero. Nero was a bad man. Bad man. So if it was Nero that was the person, then he is a type or a model. And it goes back to what we had talked about, the type and the model. When Revelation talks about 6 representative of a man, we look at it and say, okay, well, yes, it could be one man within time, but we're dealing within the whole context of eternity, how God sees it. Okay? So we can look at it and say, although there might be one particular man who fulfills this particular role, there will be other types who will be like him until the last day or until the eschaton. Okay? That still is not necessarily answering the question. If he is not the final fulfillment. He was an example of what the beasts represent. In other words, all anti-Christian forces, which is what we talked about on the board. What the number 666 signifies is the unholy trinity of the dragon, the beast of the sea, and the religious beast of the earth. So, Satan, the first beast, and the second beast, all signified by the number 6. In other words, they're They're going to give the appearance of being like God, the horns and the power and the authority with which they come, the political powers which will hold sway over the entire world's economic systems, etc., so on. It will, for all intents and purposes, appear like they are the supreme beings. And that's the way that it is now. You look at it as today and you say, how many people are looking at it, and the question is the government the supreme being and the supreme arbiter, and will there be peace brought to earth through governments and through these particular means? Each digit refers to one entity. If 777 was used, it would apply to the Holy Trinity. The evil Trinity, 666, always falls short of the Holy Trinity. The wisdom referred to in 1318, and this is kind of just repeating itself, is from God and enables Christians to see that evil forces, both secular and religious, are always at war trying to destroy the church and her witness. This wisdom is graciously given by God to all His people in Christ. I think we struggle not so much with the first beast. That's easy enough to understand. But what we really can't understand is that there are going to be churches and that there are going to be people within Christendom who are going to work in concert with the first beast. And it's hard because what this looks like is basically this. Here's a perfect example. How many of you know Rick Warren? There's been mission summits where the President of the United States has met with Rick Warren, who is now being called the Pastor of America. Mission summits with regard to that. And now Rick Warren is now working in concert with, and his form of Christianity, quote unquote, if you can call it that, is what many Americans that don't believe in Jesus, who are not Christians, believe is what Christianity looks like. And so then when they see the pastor meeting with the president, no wonder they start to think that the church and the state are working together. And that's why I talked about the new atheists. They rightly put their fingers on it and say, you know what, this is malarkey. The church and the state should remain separate. Even Jesus knew that. And so that's happening in our modern day.
So that's the number of the beast then refers to any or all of the above.
Sure. Most specifically, okay, so the first 6 is really easy. The dragon, Satan, he's easy. The second 6 is the first beast. Any institution that would stand as in opposition to God.
The second beast is the Roman Empire? I thought that was the first.
No, no. The first beast, Roman Empire, the Third Reich, etc., so on. Political powers that held power and prosperity over entire civilizations or even the world. Okay, so we've ebbed and we've flowed through these things. The second beast is church's involvement in that, for example. And then another example is, if you want to look at it in other ways, the Crusades were another bright spot in Christianity, weren't they? Where the church got involved with what the state was saying needed to be done, and that the result that Christians were actually acting more like Muslims and cutting people's heads off. That's not the way that it works. Our history is not spotless. And that's one of the things, as we're looking at it in terms of moving into the future, we have to be honest about that. We're not perfect. And not only that, but even within the Christian church, we don't agree on these things. But we need to address it in those sense. The sermon's going to be all about this today, which, by the way, happens at church where I need to be here. So, thank you all. I will push stop now.